Explosions, sabotage and battlefield chaos. Russia says no to peace again. While Ukraine offered a ceasefire, Moscow answered with missiles. Zelenskyy cuts his visit to Canada short after a massive overnight strike, while Trump skipped the Ukraine meeting altogether. At the same time, Russian FPV drones terrorize the skies, dodging defenses and striking deep. And on the ground, Ukrainian forces hold the line in 95 brutal clashes in just one day. This is Ukraine Today. I'm Zarislava Kolesnikova. Let's break it all down. They offered a ceasefire. Russia answered with missiles. 100 days ago, Ukraine took a bold step toward ending the war, announcing its readiness to have fire. But instead of dialogue, the Kremlin launched more strikes. Now President Zelenskyy is setting the record straight. Every simple peace initiative from Ukraine, the US and allied countries has been rejected by Moscow. So the question now is, can the West finally hit Russia where it hurts oil and banks? And who has the power to force peace? Don't miss this.
The Israeli-Iranian conflict has once again demonstrated that the Kremlin cannot be relied upon as a partner. Moscow has still not come to the defense of its main ally in the Middle East, Iran. Neither the strategic cooperation agreement nor the military assistance in the form of massive shipments of Shahed drones and the construction of a UAV manufacturing plant in the Russian Federation helped Iran find support from Putin, writes the New York Times. At the beginning of the conflict in the Middle East, Israel had already attacked Iranian nuclear facilities and installations, as well as eliminated members of Iran's top leadership. Meanwhile, in Moscow, they limited themselves to just a phone call and a public condemnation of the situation.
The situation reflects Moscow's dispassionate political calculation as it prioritizes its own war against Ukraine, as well as its need to maintain warm relations with other partners in the Middle East who have helped Moscow withstand Western economic sanctions. Putin does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons, and he also wants to continue improving relations with President Trump, who does have them and who has called on Iran to make a deal on its nuclear program to put an end to the attacks. Russia has also benefited from the surge in oil prices since the start of the attack, according to the New York Times.
Putin does not plan to provide military assistance to Iran. The phone conversation with U.S. President Donald Trump, in which the Kremlin dictator declared Moscow's alleged willingness to participate in a peaceful resolution of the conflict in the Middle East, was yet another confirmation of this. Experts say that it is not in Russia's interest for Tehran to possess nuclear weapons, just as it is not in its interest for there to be a regime change in Iran. After all, only partner regimes with similar authoritarian systems of governance can be allies in opposing Western democracies.
We have no idea what will happen with Iran in 2 weeks, because judging by official statements and leaks, the operation is expected to last another 2 weeks. That means 2 weeks of intensive strikes on Iranian territory, on various targets. Iran will try to respond. We don't understand whom they will target in response, because besides Israel, it's possible they will strike at American assets. They might resort to extreme options such as striking Saudi Arabia. They might even go as far as blocking the Strait of Hormuz. We really just don't know whether Iran will remain a state over the next 2 weeks, whether it will remain a stable state.
The fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria last December demonstrated that the Kremlin is not interested in helping allied regimes whose political collapse is inevitable. Putin needs isolated pariah states that will serve the Kremlin regime, supplying weapons, people and resources for Russia's geopolitical goals. According to analysts at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the military axis of Russia, China, North Korea and Iran has not materialized. The Kremlin is shifting its focus to China and North Korea. For example, on June 17, the Secretary of the Security Council of the Federation, Sergei Shoigu, traveled to North Korea for the second time in a month. There, he reached an agreement with Kim Jong-un that Pyongyang would send 6,000 sappers and military engineers to help with the reconstruction of the Kursk region. Earlier, the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Kirilo Budanov, stated that the next group of North Koreans would arrive in Russia under a new scheme as so-called labor migrants.
Previously, the Institute for the Study of War observed reports that North Korean military and technical advisors were operating in the Russian-occupied Donetsk region, including near the occupied cities of Donetsk and Mariupol. Russia may in the future deploy North Korean sappers and engineers to Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine to carry out engineering and support tasks, according to analysts from the Institute for the Study of War.
Let us recall that North Korea and China are arming the Russian army to continue the war against Ukraine. The first confirmed cases of such deliveries appeared as early as the end of 2023. Moreover, both Moscow and Pyongyang are under international sanctions, Russia for its invasion of Ukraine and North Korea for its nuclear missile programs. Analysts conclude that their growing closeness increasingly resembles a military-political alliance aimed against the US and its allies in Asia. Yulia Granovskaya for Freedom TV channel.
A major twist at the G7 summit. President Zelenskyy cut his visit short, running back to Kiev after one of the heaviest Russian attacks in a week. And just as Ukraine needed unity, Donald Trump left the summit early without even meeting Zelenskyy. What does it mean for Western support, and why now? Stay with us.
The president of Ukraine arrived at the G7 summit after the American leader had already left Kananaskis. Aboard the presidential plane, Donald Trump said that he had accomplished everything he planned at the summit and also that he had not heard about the shelling of peaceful Ukrainian cities, which was taking place at that very time. Incidentally, he did not respond later either on Tuesday. At the State Department, the Russian strikes were condemned in a restrained manner.
We condemn these strikes and express our deepest condolences to the victims and the families of all those affected. The president has recently spoken clearly regarding strikes on civilian areas in this context.
Olha Koshelenko, words of support and sympathy were received by Volodymyr Zelenskyy from other Western leaders who gathered for the special session A Strong and Sovereign Ukraine. The United Kingdom and Canada announced new restrictions against individuals and companies that help Russia circumvent sanctions, as well as against ships of the Shadow Fleet. Canada also announced military aid to Ukraine.
We are providing additional military assistance, drones, helicopters and other weaponry worth $2 billion directly to Ukraine. And we are also transferring a new tranche from frozen Russian assets, also amounting to $2 billion.
Olha Koshelenko, the figures mentioned by the Prime Minister are in Canadian dollars. In US dollars, the amounts are somewhat lower. The G7 leaders did not manage to secure any additional, at least sanction-related, aid to Ukraine from America. The day before, during dinner, Trump told them that sanctions against any country are too expensive for the United States. However, Trump did not leave the discussions with Zelenskyy completely unattended. Instead, he left Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in his place. The Wall Street Journal writes that it was precisely because of the United States' position that it was not possible to issue a joint statement on Ukraine. Washington insisted on vague wording, and as a result, the statement was abandoned altogether.
During the summit, Canada sought to reach an agreement on a joint statement regarding the war in Ukraine, which would include strong language against Russia's invasion, according to Canadian and European officials. The G7 leaders did not want to water down the wording, so Carney will include a significant portion of this statement in his own statement as chair, which will be published at the end of the summit.
Olha Koshelenko, European leaders, however, are trying not to lose contact with Trump. German Chancellor Merz wrote on X that he is cautiously optimistic about the introduction of sanctions against Russia. French President Macron is still determined to increase pressure on the Kremlin. During a closed-door conversation, Zelenskyy stated diplomacy is in crisis, but we cannot stop.
And together we must continue to urge President Trump to use his real influence to force Putin to put an end to this war. It was the United States and President Trump who proposed a ceasefire, the resumption of diplomacy, and immediate meetings and negotiations.
Olya Koshelenko, next week, the leaders of NATO countries, including Donald Trump, will gather in The Hague for the Alliance Summit. Zelenskyy has also been invited there despite resistance from the United States. This is another chance for a joint meeting. Olya Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN 1+1, Marathon United News.
They are fast, silent and deadly. Russia is ramping up its use of maneuverable FPV drones that can evade even the most advanced electronic warfare systems. Some can only be stopped by a bullet, but Ukrainians' Hartia Brigade is fighting back. In this exclusive report, we'll show you how frontline troops are training to shoot drones out of the sky and why these skills might might be the only scene standing between survival and disaster. Stay with us.
On the front line, an FPV drone is not just a scout but a fully fledged weapon. It can drop explosives directly into a trench or dugout. It's hard to hide from it and even harder to shoot it down. Maneuverability, speed, and a tiny silhouette of this makes drones an extremely difficult target. They're almost invisible in the sky.
Recently, their numbers have increased significantly. They're very maneuverable, very fast, and because of their small silhouette, like you see with branches like these, it's very hard to spot them. We rely on sound and all our skills.
The Khartia fighters are practicing shooting at drones which have multiplied several times over at the front. The enemy is actively launching drones of all types.
FPV drones are one of the most dangerous types of drones because of their mobility and high speed. That's why we provide the guys with the skills they need to be able to act proactively against drones.
But the most difficult to deal with are the fiber optic drones. They can't be jammed because the signal is transmitted through a thin cable laid directly to the drone.
The whole point is that it's not a radio signal, the entire control signal goes through the fiber optic cable itself. That's why they are immune to electronic warfare systems. To destroy them, you either have to shoot directly at them or cut the fiber optic cable itself.
During training, instructors simulate real-life conditions. The drones maneuver between trees just like on the front lines, and the best operators control them.
We try to make the training as close to actual combat as possible, so our guys understand how and when it's best to engage a drone. I try to make it more difficult for them by constantly maneuvering. But the guys handled it successfully.
With each training session, Ukrainian defenders' chances of destroying deadly FPV drones increase, and every successful shot means lives saved for their comrades. Yulia Boyko and Oleksiy Buhayenko, Kharkiv region, TSN 1+1 Marathon, United News.
Unbelievable pressure. Russia is throwing wave after wave at Ukrainian's eastern front, and today 95 fires battles are already erupted. From Pokrovsk and Novopavlivka to the violate Siversk and Slobozhanske directions, the fight is in the most intense. But Ukraine's defenders are not backing down. What's driving this new escalation? And will Russia finally break or break through? The answers are coming next.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The highest number of assaults by Russian occupiers since the beginning of the day. Ukrainian soldiers repelled them in the Pokrovsk direction. In this sector of the front, the enemy made 24 unsuccessful attempts to push the defenders from their positions.
The main thing is that the enemy has not been able to achieve its main objectives for so long. Why? Obviously, on the one hand, and this is the first factor, it is the stubborn resistance of our defense forces. The armed forces of Ukraine, the defense forces of Ukraine are conducting a strategic defensive operation, the goal of which is precisely to disrupt the enemy's plans and, on the contrary, turn them in the opposite direction, leading to the enemy's defeat.
As noted by the National Guard of Ukraine, it is specifically in the Pokrovsk direction that there has been a significant increase in the use of drones by Ukrainian fighters. Overall, since the beginning of this year, the use of drones by the defense forces to repel Russian attacks in this sector of the front has increased by 70%, preventing the enemy from entering our territory. We work both day and night to keep our skies free.
We're waiting for the order to take off.
Waiting for the command to take off. As soon as the order comes in, we'll take off immediately and do our job.
The soldiers also note that they use captured Russian drones to destroy the enemy. The fighters repair these drones and send them back this time against the occupiers. They say it's symbolic to return death to the enemy using their own means. Striped, we replace the module.
The only thing we had to do was change the module. We also basically changed the controls. We keep the flight camera, install our own initiation camera, and essentially we have a ready-to-use drone. We take their product, which they sent to us, but it didn't work. We simply rework it and send it back. It's pretty cool, and I really like that kind of symbolism.
Ukrainian soldiers are also steadfastly holding the line in other directions. In particular, 11 Russian attacks were repelled in the Novopavlivka sector of the front, 12 in the Kramatorsk sector, 8 in the Lyman sector, and 5 in the Toretsk sector. Another 2 assaults were repelled in both the Kupiansk and Siversk directions, and 3 Russian attacks in the southern Slobozhansky sector.
A shot was fired! Just came in through when the assaults were active.
When the assaults were active, they were really pushing hard. Yeah. There were even days when you'd wake up in the morning without coffee and have to run for 40 minutes because a column of vehicles was coming.
Shot fired.
In the northern Slobozhansky and Kursk sectors, there have been 21 engagements since the start of the day. As military experts note, the Russians are trying to create some kind of filtration zone in northern Ukraine, but they are not succeeding.
To create such a zone, you would need an order of magnitude more forces than what is currently deployed in the Russian direction. Moreover, a lot more forces are needed here, possibly a number comparable to the entire Russian grouping that is fighting in Ukraine. So here it's one of 2 options. Either the Russians are thinking about creating this zone, a dead zone in the north of our country, or they are giving up on their main offensive in the east of our country. They don't have the resources to carry out both.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you want to keep the truth alive and the stories flowing, support independent Ukrainian journalism, become a channel sponsor, share this video and help us fight on the information front. Your support means more than ever. Subscribe, comment and stand with Ukraine, because every choice matters. See you soon.